Hey, Earthlings. So, again, we're live on the internet, so welcome along. I only decided to do this a couple of days ago. So I've said on the description, welcome along to myself and my guests. So, first of all, here's Benny. Hi, Benny.
Hi, Roger.
Yeah, you're along for the ride, and also I'm going to put in the link in the chat. So if anybody wants to join us, feel free. So just to explain what's going on, I'm going to show this PowerPoint in a minute, and so it was. I was looking through my old PowerPoints because I've got a couple of talks to do this month, starting off at Trinity College this week, and I came across this one, and I thought, blimey, this is a long time ago. And so you know, as you do, you kind of went through it. Before I start, I've got a big pile of books here to wave in front of everybody, and I'm going to wave yours in front of everybody first, Benny. So
thank you.
This is Benny's best-selling vegan book. Is it officially a bestseller now, Benny, or what?
It's my bestseller, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good answer. So this is the best animal rights or vegan book of the year, without a shadow of a doubt. So if you don't have it yet, what's wrong with you? Get on with it. And so so this PowerPoint came across. I did a chapter in this book from 2007. Okay, and it was when I not long published my PhD, and in that I was into kind of this thing called semiology, which really translates to be harmology. Hi, Michael. How's you doing? Hey, we've got an audience. We've got an audience, Benny.
Oh, great.
So this was me looking at that, and because if you can see there, it says edited by Piers, Beirne, and Nigel South. So I've got a bit of a history with Piers in the sense that I worked with him early on in this thing, which is 2001, and we looked. If you look at the back of it, we looked at something called horse maiming. And that was the first bit of work that I did with Piers and my PhD supervisor, Chris Powell. And Piers then used that paper in his later book, which is called Confronting Animal Abuse. So that's just Piers Beirne book. That's a quite interesting book. There's a really interesting chapter about Ireland, for example. So that's how I came. That's how I kind of came to work with Piers Beirne. So I came across this PowerPoint, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting because it shows that the people who are opposed to animal use, like ourselves, but also the people who were in favor of animal use, had a really profound knowledge and kind of understanding of the distinction between animal welfare and animal rights or animal liberation. And that seems to, I've noticed lately that seems to have gone. And I think I mentioned in a recent video I did, there are some people now who are kind of confused about things like the Rspca, in the sense that there was a revelation that they had guides that talked about how to slaughter other animals. Well, yeah, it's a traditional animal welfare group, and so there seems to be a confusion about rights and welfare that doesn't exist in this PowerPoint, and this is only from the 1990s. So I was on a forum, a very early internet forum called Animal Rights Debate. So anyway, we'll get into that. Okay, so it's got a fancy name, as you can see, the social movement counter-movement dialectic, which just really means, that's just a fancy way of saying the relationship between a social movement and its counter-movement. There's some really interesting sociological work actually by a guy called Richard Gale, where he talks about instead of talking about the movement and the counter movement, he talks about the state as well. But we don't need to get into that. Mainly when people talk about this issue, they talk about a social movement and its counter movement. And if you look at this first slide, this is from this old dictionary of sociology. It's actually falling to pieces, this thing, because that saw me all my way through my MA, my BA, and my PhD. So it's absolutely falling to bits. But so this is a sociological kind of understanding of this dialectic, which is an organized effort by a significant number of people to change. So that's your social movement, or resist change. So that's your counter movement in some major aspects of society. That's a very basic, and I always tend to use that definition because it's quite nice and concise. So it's from that sociology dictionary. Okay. We don't need that one. In fact, I should have deleted that slide, but we don't need that one. So this is one thing that I said in my MA. I said, not surprising, those involved in social movement activity take a great deal of notice of what their counter movements are saying and how the battle of ideas, that's a kind of Reagan and Ryder idea, is playing out in the mass media. And so the one thing that I was involved in, as I said, was this thing called the animal rights debate. So this was a 1990s, must have been mid to late 1990s. And I think it was a Yahoo forum. So it was very early days in the internet. So it was just like text, that's all, you know. In fact, when I published my PhD originally online, I had to take all the photographs out of it because the internet couldn't cope with them at the time. So it just had to be kind of plain text. It's really a different world now in that sense. And so we noticed that it took ages and ages. You know, the early internet, if you put a picture up, it used to kind of draw it line by line, you know, like this, to wait for it to download, as it were, every single time. It wasn't just once. And so we had to take all those out. Anyway, so I was on this this animal rights debate. And so these issues came up, which is what I used in that article. And so that's what the PowerPoint became about. And this is what prompted me just a few days ago to think, wow, it's interesting how everybody seems to have a pretty good idea about welfare and rights, which doesn't seem to be the case now. So that's the kind of premise of the reason why I've invited you all to listen to me rant away today. So there you go. So these are the issues that came up in the research. It was really a content analysis of the animal rights debate. So the issue of animal rights came up, the issue of animal welfare came up, the status of Peter Singer, the philosopher, came up a lot. And then there's a really interesting ideological battle that was going on at the time, which is that the people who were animal users, the animal welfarists, were trying to paint the animal rights people as extremists and also terrorists. It was a really major kind of thing. In fact, there was kind of conferences about it. There was one in Ireland. I'll come to that if I remember to do that. So those are the issues. I start off with some stuff from I don't know. There's a point of I've just buried this in the big pile. But that's Tom Reagan's book here, which is what this is coming from. So animal rights advocates, ARAs, and he talked about the animal user industries. And so he starts to kind of give us a kind of background to what's going. And it was all based on making the difference between animal rights and animal welfare very meaningful within the kind of debate. And so it says between know-nothing animal rights extremists who hate humans and have an insatiable appetite for violence on the one hand, and wise scientific animal welfare moderates. So that's how the debate used to be framed all the time. So in those days, you wouldn't have got vegans, particularly, calling themselves animal welfarists. Whereas now, I see Facebook polls where they say, why did you get involved with veganism? And they give a big list and got animal welfare there. Very rarely do they have the word animal rights, which is really interesting. I don't know. I mean, presumably, Benny, you've seen those polls. And I just don't see very often. I see more animal welfare. So that's the basis of... Does that correspond with your experience?
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I think there's a lot of conflation anyway between people thinking that if they say, they're actually for welfare, but they will say their rights,
Hmm.
and really they
Yeah.
are welfare, really, yeah.
So it's kind of confusing to me as a long-term vegan in a way, because there's been this really interesting shift that this session is really kind of just to explore, really. Let me just change that so we can see it a bit better, I think. So Reagan is talking about how there was this organized effort by the animal user industries to promote themselves as animal welfarists and us as animal rights people or animal liberation people, which meant they were trying to get it to mean extremist and all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to say hello. Hey, Wendy, hello. Tanya, hello. Jennifer, hello. I think I said hello to Michael already. Yeah, and so that's the way this big debate played out. And in Ireland, where I am now, there was a conference which attracted animal experimenters, circus proprietors, farmers, people involved in horse racing, people involved with greyhound racing. And they had a conference about what to do about these animal rights extremists. And it was really interesting that after the conference, when they appeared on the media, they all came out with the same kind of rhetoric. And one of the things that they always said was, oh, well, these animal rights extremists, what they want is a meatless, petless society. So it didn't matter who was talking, a vivisector or a circus person, all that. They all trotted out this line. Oh, these people, they want a meatless, petless society. And so obviously they were trying to kind of appeal to the public to say, well, look, we're just people who care about other animals, and these are people who want to abolish stuff that you want to do, like have pets and like eat this kind of stuff. So it became a real major kind of claim.
Emotional appeal, that really.
Emotional appeal. That's right. Yeah. And so again, this is interesting. This is Reagan quoting the an anti-fur group. And the majority of Americans support animal welfare groups, but do not support any out of touch with reality, publicity-hungry animal rights groups. Animal welfare groups support humane treatment and responsible care of animals, while the animal rights philosophy not only condemns the use of all animals for any purpose, but also is known for its increasing terroristic tactics. The current mindset of the animal rights movement is believe what I believe or else. So that's Reagan quoting the fur proprietors. And there's a couple of British examples. This is Lord Donahue. And this is really interesting because this rhetoric about animal rights equaling terrorism, animal welfare is reasonable, even fed into places where you wouldn't expect it to feed into. This is about the debate to ban hunting in Britain. And so he's basically calling animal terrorists. He's calling people like the League Against Cruel Sports animal terrorists here. And he explained later, he called lobbyists animal terrorists because their aim is to destroy the countryside as we know it. So this was, you can see this kind of real kind of ideological kind of framework being built, that they're the reasonable animal welfarists and they're opposed to these terrible, terrible animal rights extremists. These are two vivisectors. Colin Blakemore was very prominent at one point. But he said, if you are willing to talk about this issue in public, they will kill you. And then you had the Research Defense Society, which doesn't exist now. It's actually been taken over by something, I think. But they were saying the same thing. So as I was saying, it's really across the board in terms of the animal user industries that they were all kind of doing this. And they all fell in line with this. We are reasonable animal welfarists. They are terrible, violent animal rights people and animal liberation people. That was the ideological battle in those days. So this is something from this book, which is by Gouthia. I think it's Gouthia. I've always said Gouthia for years. So this is called Animal Rights: The History and Scope. And so I just want to read you something which is really interesting. This is from a chapter 11, and he talks about the emerging counterforce. I don't know if you can I line that up? The emergence counterforce. They're my notes all over it. It's got welfare all the way. I don't know if you can see that or not. And I just want to make clear about who is making this case, who is saying this, right? So we've got the Animal Welfare Coalition in North America, and their members include the American Dairy Science Association, American Farm Bureau Federation, American Feed Manufacturers Association, American Meat Institute, American Society for Animal Science, American Veal Association, Animal Health Institute, Commission on Farm Animal Care, Farm and Industrial Equipment Institute, Holstein Association, Livestock Conservation Institute, Livestock Marketing Association, National Broiler Council, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, National Lamb Feeders Association, National Livestock and Meat Board, National Livestock Producers Association, National Milk Producers Federation, National Pork Producers Council, National Turkey Federation, National Wool Growers Association, Poultry Science Association, National Turkey Federation, National Wool Growers Association, oh, that's twice, something called Provimi, don't know what that is, and United Egg Producers. Then it says, in addition to those industry groups, the United States Department of Agriculture is also listed as a member of the Farm Animal Welfare Coalition. So that is just one coalition with all those groups in it, right?
Yeah.
And what they did was they kind of put together this incredible thing where they thought, okay, we're going to have to get all our ducks in a row in terms of our rhetoric, and that's exactly what they did. And this is the kind of outcome of it. One interesting thing about what goes on now and what goes on then is that as soon as you talked about animal rights in those days, you're immediately branded as a terrorist. And we'll see that in the comments from this forum. Even people who worked in aquariums, if they questioned animal use at all, they were called terrorists. And so it was really interesting the way that this worked. I mean, at least now, I mean, what do they call people? We're militants. And yeah, but
I've just seen a
yeah. Do you hear vegans being called terrorists anymore? You don't really.
Well, I've just seen the anti-terrorist kind of leaflet from 2019, and I just shared that up on my Facebook. So I had a list of symbols to look out for, and included in that was the vegan flag, and organisations to look out for. Surge.
It's a terrorist flag.
Yeah.
That's that damn Ronnie Lee, isn't it?
It's a terrorist symbol, and obviously there's a big list of them anyway. But I was quite surprised to see Surge there, and obviously you had the likes of DXE, and then it had like a glossary of terms. People would be talking about direct action and that type of thing.
Ed Winter's a well-known terrorist. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, isn't it? This is kind of language use. Like we talk about how our language has been important, but they really think about their language as well. In what Reagan would call the battle of ideas. Okay, so this is getting down to the people now who were part of this forum. Oh look, Michael's a terrorist. Yeah, I'm afraid so. Everybody in the chat, by the way, you're all terrorists. So shame on you. There's blood on your hands. I'll get Jennifer laughing, I'm sure. So you're all terrorists. You're all a complete disgrace to the human race. So this is the National Animal Interest Alliance. And everything that Reagan said is what they kind of stand for. And one of their aims is to provide this website to alert animal owners and others about the difference between animal rights and animal welfare, and the battle for responsible laws, regulations, and guidelines affecting animal treatment, use, and ownership. So they're in the kind of, in Ireland, the ISPCA, in Britain, the Rspca kind of situation. It's not abolitionist. It's not vegan. It's about humane use, you know. So it's more into the traditional welfare things, even things like compassionate farming would fit into that. So let me just switch tack, because I was quite surprised to find that this website still exists. I didn't think it would. I thought it might have gone, you know, from the 1990s. So if you look in the resources section, it's got here the case against animal rights and environmental extremists. So when you click on that, it brings up this page. It's got the quotes from the leaders of the animal rights movement. These are quite interesting. Won't be going through them. Just want to say again, there's a big subsection which is animal welfare and animal rights. And so even people like Bruce Friedrich is an extremist in this. Obviously, Francione's in there, and Ingrid Newkirk, Francione and Tom Reagan, Yaroski's there, and so on and so forth. But basically, they're still kind of promoting this as a terroristic kind of thing. I was really kind of interested to see that this still exists because, as I said, I thought it had gone. Whoa, that's wrong. Let me, that's for later. Right, okay. Let's add this back to the stream. Okay.
Have you ever seen that big conspiracy chart they've kind of done? I think it's based on the Humane Society, and it's got all the links between all the different organizations.
Oh, that big map thing.
Yeah. Actions, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, it's like a spider's walked all over it, isn't it? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah. And is that basically saying the same kind of thing as this?
Well, yeah, they're classing them as animal rights, really. Even though
that'd be the Humane Society,
and everything.
Yeah, HSUS. Yeah. See, the thing is, as soon as they want to discredit you, the way it was is that they said you weren't an animal welfarist.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why the vegans in those days didn't claim to be animal welfarists, because it was kind of, well, you know, I'm not an animal welfarist, I'm an animal rights person, you know, and like I said, that divide seems to have gone a little bit. So this is how it starts to unfold. So this is part of the content analysis of this particular forum, animal rights debate. I'm not going to read this out. Essentially, this is saying this Norma Bennett Wolfe explaining to Jim. Now, Jim was a kind of a bit of a kind of moderate who was kind of exploring the idea of animal rights and asking questions, and so they kind of fell on this guy as with a ton of bricks, really. And so first of all, they kind of just gave a kind of standard outline of what they were compared with what we the vegans are, kind of thing. We support animal use, believe that those who own and interact with animals tend to be the experts in their care and training, and work hard to make and support improvements where improvements are necessary. The goal of animal rights is to end animal use. And the goal of animal welfare is to give animals a decent life and a quick death while we benefit from their presence in our lives. So the Rspca tend not to use exactly the same kind of language, but they're in the same kind of ballpark. These are two completely incompatible sets of goals. So that's the National Animal Interest Alliance setting their stall out on this particular thing. And so this is how the kind of conversation we've got Michael saying there's even more terrorists in the chat now. I know, it's a shame, isn't it? It's terrible.
I'm sure it's all being monitored.
I'm gonna just put this link again into the box, folks, in case you do want to join us, just to kind of say your tuppence worth. And so again, this is interesting. The first one from Kathy turns out that they were really opposed to animal rights people giving out any information at all, even leaflets. And so they were saying that if you give an animal rights leaflet to anyone, especially children, that's an act in itself of terrorism, right? And so, I mean, God knows what these people make of things like earthing experience and AV. I mean, you'd think they would have had a meltdown by now. So I don't know whether that site is still being updated or whether it's just stood there kind of stagnant. I did notice that most of the references were quite old. Most of the quotes and that were quite old. So maybe it's just been left there, but certainly I've not seen anybody. I mean, anybody in the chat, I mean, it's a North American organization, but anybody in the chat, have you heard of the National Animal Interest Alliance before and know what it was all about? That'd be interesting to know. And then we've got Norma Bennett Wolf again. I don't care if you or anybody else believes in animals have rights. I care only if you believe that you're trying to push it. And so this is almost like an early TikTok thing that's going on now, which is, oh, you're trying to push it down our throats and you're trying to force us your opinions on us, those kind of ideas, which are really interesting, of course, from a campaigning point of view, because of course we can't. I think there might be a lot of people who want to, but we can't do what they accuse us all doing. In fact, there was a grumpy vegan granddad live on TikTok about 4 days ago, and he got permanently banned after that, although he appealed. And you had the same people saying, "You're forcing us to be vegan," and then they would write, "Well, I'm off to McDonald's. Anybody coming?" Right? I'm going to have a Big Mac and all this kind of stuff. And I was thinking, they'll just say anything. Like these kind of people will say anything, because on the one hand they're saying, "You're forcing me to be vegan," and I'm on the way to McDonald's. I mean, like those two things just don't live together at all. But that's what they keep saying.
It's tragic in a way, because I see it as like the people that are using these arguments against vegans have kind of been manipulated by this rhetoric and this kind of playbook to they're doing the arguing for the meat and dairy industries against vegans. The animal agribusiness must be
it's like a script, isn't
it? It's a definite playbook. I mean, you see the extremism thing still, and you see the each to their own kind of, you're forcing me, and then you ask them, how are you being forced, and they don't know.
I mean, the two favorite things on TikTok is you're forcing us, and also I don't care, which always begs the question, why are you here? Those kind of arguments. Now this top one from Bint, I'll come back to Bint, is really interesting, because there was a BBC program this morning called The Reunion. I don't know whether you can get it internationally, but it was about the McLibel trial, and it was really, really interesting. So it was Dave Morris and Helen Steele reliving the McLibel trial, and along with people who represented McDonald's at the time, and also Keir Starmer, who gave his legal expertise free to the McLibel people. So I don't know if people know about that. It talks about how they infiltrated, McDonald's infiltrated London Greenpeace, the group involved, and also the police infiltrated. In fact, one of the infiltrators had an affair with Helen Steele, and then kind of faked a mental breakdown and disappeared. And then it turned out, and this came from the McDonald's person in the program, that the "What's Wrong with McDonald's" famous or infamous leaflet was written by one of the police officers. And so all the trouble was caused by what the police officers had written. And then they also found out that the McDonald's spies were going to Scotland Yard, liaising with the police. And so McDonald's then knew what the kind of defendants, as it were going to do. But there's another thing that reminded me about this, because it says no one needs to be worried about the animal rights advocates who just go about their life being vegan and trying to convince their friends to do the same. What happened was, in the early days of the McLibel trial, McDonald's flew some executives over and had a secret meeting with Dave and Helen. And they said, look, we can solve this, and we don't have to go to court, but what we need for you to do is promise that you don't make any public statements about McDonald's. We don't mind you talking to your family and friends about McDonald's, but we don't want you to make any public statements, which is kind of what's been said here too. And the response from Helen Steele was absolutely brilliant. She said, well, okay, if McDonald's agrees to never do any advertising, and then you executives can just talk to your family and friends about McDonald's, then we might have a deal. And of course, that they weren't going to do that. So I thought that was really interesting. But again, this idea that they're trying to shut you up, which is. But this is what was going on in those days as well. No one needs to be worried about the ones who are just being vegan. It's the gobby ones who say anything that are the problem.
You see that as a comment all the time. If vegans just keep to themselves. I'm fine with that. Yeah. Just let us get on with ourselves. They just don't want any
conversation. That irony. They also live and let live, don't they?
That's it. Yeah.
The most ironic thing. Is there a name for that kind of claim?
Yeah. Well, they're all thought terminating cliches, which, as you mentioned, my book, that's basically the first chapter of the book is about not wanting to even have the conversation. So all these things are kind of trying to stop any talk about it. It's trying to silence us, basically. People say, oh, I'm fine with the quiet vegans. Basically, anyone that says anything about veganism is in their bad books. But
yeah. And back in these days, everyone was a terrorist.
Yeah.
And so this is when Jim, the kind of moderate guy who was exploring the idea of animal welfare and animal rights, he started to say, look, I'm just asking a few questions. And they really kind of went for the guy. And eventually this Jim started saying, look, you're being reactionary. I'm just asking a few questions, right? And they just kind of jumped all over him. He said, is it reactionary to speak out against violence, to consider that the Earth Liberation Front and the Animal Liberation Front are domestic terrorists, which was the kind of thing that was going around at the time. So excuse the ableism in this one, folks, but Jim replies, what are you, a silly question. I, as well as Rags and Probo, have spoken repeatedly against such violence. But you, because you're a propagandist, you just keep throwing it back, which is exactly what was going on. So Rags in this conversation, that's me. Okay, so that I was going under the name Rags. And Probo was a legal scholar who's written a couple of books. I can't reveal their name, but their full name on this thing was, that they talk about pro bono. They were called pro bono. What's the primate? Yeah, so it was like a play on words, so that is really good.
Legal term.
Yeah, but also the primate I've forgotten the name of. Somebody in the comments will tell me what I should have said, I'm sure. I'll say, so this big argument going on. Let me move that on. So Jim again is appealing, this time to someone called Lisa. Can't we just disagree about rights without saying something off the edge that I'm supporting terrorism? So their situation was that even, that's it. Bonobo, pro Bonobo, Funny, something just got out of your head, don't they? Yeah, thanks for that. And so again, this kind of thing is going on over and over again. And then this is an interesting one. So this one called Peachy Bean also started to ask a few questions. And they get labeled terrorists as well. And they said, look, I work at an aquarium. I eat meat. And I don't want to end prep. I'm just asking a few questions and this kind of stuff. And so they put this person into the terrorist category along with everybody else. It was a really kind of strong thing. We are the peaceful welfarists. You're the rights people who are terrorists. It was a really bizarre thing. And then again, we've got the same thing. Again, Jim is still saying, are we going to talk about the ideas, or are you just going to carry on ranting and raving? And And then here, Bulldog, who is another name for Lisa, actually, animal welfarists are not the ones we are calling terrorists. Animal rights activists, animal liberators, and their supporters, those I call terrorists. And then somebody called Randolph Kritzer said, same folks defending animal rights terrorism and chicken rights. He thought he was making a joke. So that was the construction of peaceful welfarists versus, kind of animal rights terrorists. And then this is the kind of final one on that, really. This is Kathy. The animal rights movement supports violence in seeking its goals. Oh, not every individual does, but PETA is the largest animal rights organization, and they pay money to convicted criminals. So that's a reference to Gary Yourofsky at the time, because he was working for PETA at the time. They support Jerry, that's Jerry Dalask, and I think he was like representing the ALF at the time, but the North American ALF, and I think they departed from the British thing, which always had a non-violence policy. I think they departed from that. They pay a salary to men who advocate terrorism. So again, that's a kind of a reference to Yourofsky. So they've got this total construction of what the debate is all about: animal rights violence versus animal welfare, peacefulness, and just getting on with it. So we're going to move tack now to Peter Singer. In my chapter, I said that they don't seem to be able to do without Peter Singer. And so one thing that they wanted to do was suggest that Peter Singer was an animal rights advocate and that we all supported Peter Singer. That was part of their construction. And so when they talked about Peter Singer, they kind of assumed that because you're an animal rights extremist like he is, you agree with everything. And so this one is talking about a famous thing that Singer did. Was he did a review which was called Heavy Petting. So this is it. This actually is Piers Beirne commenting on Singer's review, which was called Heavy Petting. And it's really interesting because it took Tom Reagan to actually nail it on the head, in the sense, because he said, why sex with animals violates their rights. And this is where Reagan spells out the difference between animal rights and utilitarianism in particular. The book was and continues to be heralded by many as the Bible of the animal rights movement. I think the first people who said that on one edition of Animal Liberation was Animal Aid. In fact, it might have been Jean Pink who founded Animal Aid in 1977, or it could have been Mark Gold who was her successor. And then Reagan said, that's unfortunate. Not only does it cede to animal liberation a status it does not enjoy, it gives Singer an authority he does not deserve. So Reagan and Singer, philosophically, they may have been fairly matey in person, but philosophically they really had a go at each other, And so he says, look, animal rights is abolitionist in nature, whereas Singer isn't. And this is why Singer could suggest that in some circumstances, we go back to what Piers Beirne said, is controversial suggestion that human-animal sexual relations can be tolerated if they do not involve cruelty. So it's in the welfare paradigm. Okay, so that was Singer's argument, that if it doesn't involve cruelty, then it might be tolerable. And he talked about the actual size of the type of other animal that people were having sex with. So he was saying that horses and cows are so big they might not actually notice if a man was having sex with them. Whereas if men had sex with chickens, they would kill the chickens, right? And this brought up a big argument, because in the States at the time, and I don't know whether they still exist, there were such things as animal brothels, where people could go and legally have sex with other animals, because they always made a joke about they took their own bucket, in other words, to stand on. right? So that was all going on. So there was this thing, but how it came out in the debate was that, again, they were talking about the popularity of Singer in the movement, and there is an issue here, because the movement did valorize Singer's position over Reagan's, and so from an outsider looking for a critique, they could latch onto Singer.
Yeah.
You know? And we were trying to say, me and Probo was trying to say, well, hang on though, Peter Singer's not an animal rights advocate. But of course, they kind of wouldn't listen to that. So this is an article, and again, it's talking about Singer's writing, and you know how kind of popular it is within the animal rights movement, which of course is a mismatch, as you know, philosophically. Singer even coined the term speciesist, which is not true. That was Richard Ryder, as we know. And so again, there was this construction to do that. So this is an interesting misunderstanding of what's been said. Probo, in her critique of Singer, says Singer believes, for example, that one animal might be replaced with another animal. If the replacement has an equally pleasant or more pleasant life than the original had, then the death of the first does not necessitate ethical concern. So that is Probo explaining Peter Singer's position, which he still adheres to. He's always been consistent about this, right? That it's not the killing that's the problem. It's the kind of suffering, and that's why there's a big focus on things like factory farming and all that. And then this is KC answering Probo, saying, "Oh, I thought you said that Singer wasn't an animal rights advocate. You guys want it both ways." And so KC is not understanding what Probo is saying.
Yeah.
And so Probo comes back, no, I don't want it both ways. Note, I do not agree with Singer. And two, Singer is not a rights advocate. So let me just see if I can just share my screen just for a second. I hope you can hear this actually. So this is Peter Singer being interviewed, and it only lasts for the bit that we want to watch is only going to be a minute. Just let me know that you can hear this, okay, folks? Can you hear that, Benny?
Yeah, that's okay.
Starting with animal rights, a lot in your work, a lot of your positions about animal rights stems from a notion of equality. So why is equality so important when viewing both humanity and other animals in the animal kingdom?
Okay, before I answer the question, though, I want to make just one little pedantic point.
Absolutely.
Some of you just heard me say that if we take a rights approach to human rights, it becomes difficult to decide what set of human rights we have. Julia, you talked about animal rights there, and of course the same would apply to that. Do animals have rights? What rights do they have? Although people very frequently describe me as an animal rights advocate, as you just did, and that's fine from the point of view of taking a political stance. People will know what side I'm on, where I am. Philosophically, I'm not an animal rights advocate because I don't think that rights is the appropriate terminology to think about the issue.
Right. So that's Singer describing his position, and he's always been consistent on that. And he's complained about being called an animal rights person for years. Goes back to 1976 when the first reviews of animal liberation came out, and he complained, saying, "Hey, why are you calling me an animal rights person?" And in fact, he even said in a response to one of the reviews, "I actually regret using the word rights in animal liberation," because he talks about women's rights at one point. And he said because of the confusion that it's caused. And he said that ever since. It wasn't helped by Peter started to sell animal liberation and called it an animal rights book. And he even said something like, and it's still there now on the North American Peter site. He says, if you only read one animal rights book ever or something, this should be the one. You're nodding, Benny. I think you've probably seen that. Yeah.
I think it's the only one they sell, isn't it?
It is now. They used to have a few more. That's right.
Yeah.
And Animal Aid, again, they sold Animal Liberation. And as I said, they actually said that that Animal Liberation was it was called the Bible of the new animal rights movement, you know, which again is a misunderstanding of the philosophy. Now, it's interesting because Singer in that clip said that it was a pedantic point that he was making, whereas Reagan, a few minutes before, he was saying, no, actually, there's a fundamental difference here between the animal rights position and Peter Singer's position, because the animal rights position, or what he called the rights view, is abolitionist in nature, whereas Peter Singer's position never has been. Even in Animal Liberation, he said that he couldn't find a good argument to talk about free-range egg production as being unethical.
Yeah.
And in his latest book, which is called, I think it's called Why Vegan, only came out, I think, last year, he said on page 5, I think it was, this will come as a surprise to most of you, but technically I'm not a vegan. And he said, and technically I'm not a vegetarian either. Right. And so, but again, Peter Singer's always been consistent about that. He's called himself a flexible vegan, a flexitarian, these kind of things. So
from his perspective, then, you know, it's when people are calling him animal rights, really he's right to point out that he's not, because that's, you know, his arguments aren't based on rights, they're based on utilitarianism, and especially the replaceability argument is one I had a really big problem with, because basically
that's what Probo was saying. That bit at the top, because the replaceability argument is really, you know, off the scale from a rights-based point of view, because you're just their life doesn't matter so long as you replace them with somebody else who's gonna have an equally good life or preferably a better one. You know,
the individual doesn't matter there at all.
Yeah, so it's a real thing. Do you think, Benny, that I mean, I think obviously we've got, in terms of who came first, Peter Singer beat Reagan with Animal Liberation, which came out in the 1970s, and the case didn't come out until the 1980s. And so in that sense, Peter Singer got in there first, right? And so Peter Singer's Animal Liberation is seen as the revitalization of what's now called the animal rights movement. But because it's a utilitarian position, then anybody using the word rights from that point of view is using it rhetorically, whereas Reagan is rights-based. I don't know that the movement understands that point, and I don't think it ever has. Do you?
No, I don't think that's well understood, really. I think rights is just used generically to mean welfare, really, and they're just conflated. I mean, I think it is unfortunate that Singer got in there first. So, I mean, you can trace rights back further, though, than Reagan, of course, but, you know, going back to Henry Salt and that type of writer. But
yeah, although, you know, Donald Watson pointed out that Henry Salt argued against veganism from a vegetarian point of view. So that was quite interesting, because he is seen as kind of like first wave animal rights in a way. This is interesting. I found the book Practical Ethics far more convincing. Actually, it's that book that Probo attacked most, because I think that's where the most expansive articulation of the replacement argument was in. I think that came out initially, was it 93? I think it came out. I'm not sure. It must have been earlier than that. Because, yeah, it could have been.
I think it's 80s, yeah.
Yeah. So that's an interesting one. Okay, so as we see then, Peter Singer is not an animal rights philosopher, but this was the response. Okay, let me see if I've got this right. Peter Singer says he's not an animal rights advocate, so that means he's not. I've always loved that. Because it's kind of like, I don't care what Peter Singer says. we're going to give him that label because it's in our interest to do so, which ironically is exactly the same as what Peter did with Peter Singer. They almost ignored the virtual begging of Peter Singer. Please don't call me an animal rights person. And as you say, you still got that description of the book. And so now Peter Singer kind of, I think, accepted that the animal rights movement, the animal advocacy movement, whatever you want to call it, some would call it the animal welfare movement, we're not sophisticated enough philosophically to know why Peter Singer is not happy with being called an animal rights person. And so he's almost like accepted it now. And to the extent that, like he said at that Carnegie Hall thing, well, that's okay. You know, if you just want to kind of cite me politically, which side of the fence I'm on, type of thing, that's okay. But really, I'm not, type of thing. But
or even he'll put out a general label of being vegan and let people have that impression. He's kind of happy for that impression to be out there. I suppose that's similar with a rights thing now. He's not too bothered if that impression is out there, or maybe he just feels like he can't do much about it now anyway.
Well, I don't think he's ever claimed to be vegan. You know, again, it's one of those things where, I mean, it's a little bit like this movement and celebrities. As soon as they mention anything plant-based, they, oh, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger was a vegan and all this kind of stuff, right? And of course, it's kind of part of an understandable thing on a social psychology level. Of we want the movement to look as though it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and attracting all kinds of influencers and all this kind of stuff. But you know, it's not in the sense that we're co-opting people who are not vegan and calling them vegan, whether they like it or not. And so sometimes they go, well, I've never said I was vegan. And I think Singer would be in the same boat as that.
Or even going back into history, saying, you know, historical figures were vegan when we've got no evidence for that for certain people. Yeah,
now this has always been a bugbear for me in the movement, actually, is the fact that I've always argued that if you don't agree with or adhere with animal rights as a philosophical idea, then why call yourself animal rights? You know, there's no shortage of names, as it were. What people have said to me, activists in particular, have said, well, I call myself animal rights because otherwise people will think I'm an animal welfarist, going back to where we started. And people like Ronnie was careful to always use the phrase animal liberation. But of course, then you've got the confusion because you got Peter Singer's animal liberation, then you got the ALF version of animal liberation as well. And so it pushes you, if you want to kind of not say you're a welfarist in the way that this conversation has shown it to be, you say, oh, I'm animal rights, or I'm animal rights / liberation. But as Kevin says here, there's no space for animal rights within the animal rights movement. In my PhD, I said there's not much rights in animal rights because there was a famous philosophy book which says there ain't no black in the Union Jack. And so I used the kind of same kind of construction to say, well, they ain't much rights in animal rights either. And of course, that's true. It's just that I think, again, going back to the entire problem, is most people who you say, let's create space for animal rights, they say, what difference does it make? What, you know, why would we, kind of thing, almost, you know, kind of, why would we give up the best label, which is animal rights, for you? And you say, well, because Peter Singer says that it's not a good basis for social movement argument, which is what he said right at the end of that video. But that's exactly what animal rights people do say, that it's the basis of our argument. Animal rights is the basis of our argument. And so therefore, if there's anybody that is legitimately going to be called animal rights people, you would have thought it would be people who agreed with the philosophy of animal rights. But that's not what has happened in our movement. It's a real kind of shame in that sense.
I think that's similar with the vegan label, you know, where people kind of want to claim the vegan label when really that's not what they believe, or it's not what they're defending anyway. Maybe
I think it's complicated, isn't it? I think some people get the vegan label thrust on them
Mm.
in this, you know, like the celebrities.
Yeah, yeah.
But I do think there's also people who will say, yeah, I'm vegan, probably use it as shorthand or something. And
Yeah.
I don't know whether there's a pejorative to say I'm plant-based. I mean, if you're
Yeah, I
plant-based,
saw one celebrity saying I'm plant-based, I'm not vegan. It was quite recently in some interview, and he was just explaining, you know, I want to say I'm plant-based so that people don't misunderstand, you know.
Okay, so this is interesting because this goes into what's coming out. We're getting almost to the end of the PowerPoint now, in a way. I've actually cut out quite a few slides, which are all kind of academic stuff, but I'm kind of hoping it kind of still holds together in a way. So let's just move on. Now this is interesting, where again we've got this deliberate misunderstanding. This is Robert Garner. He wrote an interesting book called Animals, Politics and Morality. I think it was about 1996. And it was Robert Garner who did the animal rights debate with Francione, you know, the book. And he writes, Singer is clear that he is not an advocate of rights. And so Garner is saying what Singer says about himself, right? And what Bint says, just because Garner believes that Singer is not an advocate of rights doesn't mean that this belief should be clear to anybody else. So it's a real kind of 1984 misuse of language here, because Garner is quoting Singer saying, I'm not a rightist. Yeah, but that's not what these people need to be the case. They're almost using Singer. Yeah, they're using Singer to discredit the animal rights movement because of his controversial things about, you know, euthanasia and children, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So again, even though you would present evidence from Singer himself and also academics quoting Singer, it wasn't good enough for these people, because going back to that thing, just because he says he's not doesn't mean he's not, as far as we're concerned. That they want. I mean, they're the ones who wanted it both ways in that sense.
We're going to label him and define him anyway by our own definition.
Now, this one, I think, is the last one. Going back to the word bint here, it's really funny because my server or something crashed during the time I was on animal rights debate. So I had to come back with a different name. And so I called myself Gumbo Jill, right? And this has been really took the piss out of me because I didn't know what gumbo meant. And in North America, it's some kind of flesh-based stew or soup, I believe. And they kept saying, ha ha, you know, you're so stupid, you didn't know what gumbo meant, you know, ha ha, you know, this kind of stuff. And I said, well, that's interesting because you probably don't know what in Britain the word bint means. Right? and I explained it to them, and then they accused me of being sexist because they were saying that I'm supposed to be saying now that you're a loose woman and all that and a tart and this kind of stuff. And I'm saying, no, I was doing with you what you did with me. You said I didn't understand the word gumbo, which is true. And so I made the mistake. You didn't understand the word bint. And so you made, and that's all I was saying to them. But again, it was the way that they put this thing together. It's kind of like anything that happened in this debate.
Yeah.
They made it in their favor.
Anything to try and discredit you, yeah.
Yeah. And the main thing that was going on all the time was that they were framing it within that general framework of there's a big difference between animal rights and animal welfare. And as I said, I've noticed in the modern vegan movement that seems to have gone. And I don't know why. I mean, I don't know if anybody in the chat kind of could explain that. I mean, obviously, you've got the kind of Francione hybrid, you know, the so-called new welfarist and the neo-welfarist. And so for people in the chat who don't know what that means, Francione says that there are traditional welfarists like the Rspca. So no vegan should be in any confusion about the RSPCA or even compassionate animal farming. They are a traditional animal welfare group. They're not abolitionist. They're not vegan. And they never claim to be either. They're a traditional welfarist thing, and they set themselves up as their job is to prosecute people who are cruel to other animals on the basis of the central core concept of animal welfarism, which is not causing unnecessary suffering. Now, legally, we know that when they say unnecessary suffering, it implies that there is some suffering that is necessary, right? So when the RSPCA takes someone to court, like a farmer, for example, they say this farmer has been caught causing unnecessary suffering. And so the court says, well, what do farmers normally do to their animals? And that is what we'll regard as being the necessary suffering on the grounds that they see other animals as property and they see the farmer as property owner. And it's not rational for the property owner to mistreat their property in such a way that they kind of become, unfit for use, as it were. And so that's how this entire kind of court case resolved itself. Did this farmer that the RSPCA have taken to court, did they do anything worse than what farmers in general do? Because that's the difference between necessary suffering and unnecessary suffering. So that's traditional animal welfare. And then what Francione came up with was this concept of new welfarist, which he first talked about in Rain Without Thunder in 1996. And he said that there's now a new group of animal advocates who think that we can get to animal rights through animal welfare. And it kind of amounts to kind of welfare plus welfare plus welfare will equal animal rights in the end type of thing. And he said that there are philosophical and practical difficulties with all that. That's what the entire book about. So there is that kind of complication of the new welfarists. And maybe what we've got now is a movement that is new welfarist, which is what actual Francione would argue, which is why he's left the movement. He runs a counter movement. And so maybe that's the answer. Maybe the implication for us, Benny, because we're both into animal rights philosophically, is that we have to accept that we're not in an animal rights movement.
I think, the mainstream probably isn't. No.
Well, the question
you have to accept that, really. Well, I was going to ask you, which organisations would you say are animal rights?
Well, Francione would say none, right?
Yeah.
And then there are a few that seem to be at the beginning, and then they've kind of slid into corporate welfare. The classic case there would be PETA, and Francione used to be the legal advisor for PETA, and so they're the classic thing. But you've also got groups like Animal Equality. I was good mates with them when they were just like a grassroots group in Spain, and now they've become like a transatlantic welfare group. So there's a few groups like that. There's one in particular that I'm not going to name, which seems to be going down this road. They seem to be fairly radical, launched lots of investigations and everything, and now they're sliding into, we've got to prosecute these bad people and these cruel people and this kind of stuff. But they will claim to be abolitionists, like Francione. Francione wouldn't accept it. I don't know whether we should. But we're accepting their status as new welfarists, not as rightists. But again, I don't know what that
promote both in a way as well. Like, I don't think you can promote veganism and vegetarianism at the same time, obviously, or reducitarianism, can't absorb veganism the way they try and fold it into it. So I think you've just got to advocate one thing really.
Here's a question. Do you think pragmatism and new welfarism are the same? Well, it certainly would feed into, effective altruism. It would feed into the kind of flexitarian, reducitarian type positions, wouldn't it? Because they would say, I mean, people like Tobias Leonhardt would say that they are a vegan advocate, even though most of the evidence is against that, because he actually advocates that vegans should eat other animals to make veganism more popular as an idea. But he would say that, well, he will get to veganism before you abolitionists will. And I think the new welfarists said that to the rightists. And I think that's why, in the end, all the established groups, from Peter, who changed, through to all the British ones who were influential, eventually rejected Reagan. And none of them featured any Reagan books, as far as I know. And if they did, it would have been only for a couple of years or a few months. And you could only find Peter Singer. When Francione started writing, I contacted Animal Aid and asked them why they didn't stock any Francione books. And they were going, well, we've got Peter Singer. And we said, yeah, but that doesn't really answer the question. And so they did feature Introduction to Animal Rights for a while in their book list. I don't know whether it's still there or not. I haven't looked for ages, but I can guarantee that Animal Liberation will be, because that is the core text of our movement. Another thing which is interesting, of course, Benny, is that if you explain Peter Singer's position to most modern day vegans, they disagree with it, wouldn't they?
Yeah, because I think the questions that naturally come up to us as vegans, people are going to ask about free range, humane slaughter, even kind of things around the replaceability argument. So they'll use a kind of logic of the larder, which is, well, these animals wouldn't exist unless we were breeding them to eat them, so therefore that's justified. All the type of questions we get as vegans, if we've got that vegan position, we're defending them. So, and I think Singer just wouldn't defend those positions. So there's that conflict is there. And I don't think obviously none of the utilitarians would defend veganism, really. I don't see how you can arrive at it from utilitarianism, really. Plus, but
yeah, they do, don't they?
Pragmatists I think that's the effect of altruists, really, as well. Yeah.
I mean, this one, Singer causing rot in the AI community, but who would agree with that, and who would know what that means? Even that's our difficulty in a way. Is a sense that probably doesn't make sense to most of the people in the AR community, so called, and that's where you'd kind of first have to start. Well, is this community badly named? That's another one. It's interesting. Yeah, it's called Sentient Rights Island. I'm giving a talk to them. They want to know the difference between rights and welfare, and they're giving a talk on the 20th, I think. So one of the things that this month. So we've got an interesting situation, and the only thing that separates all this from what was going on then was that all the activists that I knew would reject the name animal welfare. And in fact, they'd also, another thing that most of them would argue against, well, some of the writing would contradict this, but most people I knew would say that they're not animal lovers, which is another phrase that has come up it's kind of resurrected itself within the vegan movement. They used to say, well, don't call me an animal lover, because, it's not to do with loving them, it's to do with respecting their rights. And again, you've got the modern day rhetoric, which is you can't be an animal lover if you're not a vegan, which goes against what the ideology of animal welfarism says. So there's an interesting confusion. It's almost like there's a battle of ideas now where everybody is claiming to be an animal welfarist as opposed to having this divide that we've seen. But now they're trying to reinterpret it in different ways. And presumably the traditional animal welfarists just stay as they've always been, like, say, the Rspca. And the new vegan activists, because they see animal welfare as linked now to veganism, they don't understand traditional animal welfare.
I think it's just not understanding the history of it, really, because there might be some people quite new to the movement and they just haven't had time to look back, really. You know, maybe the reason they've gone vegan is they've seen something from the modern movement, some of the modern influencers and activists, and you don't see history mentioned that much, really, by some of the modern activists. Really, they won't go further back than, you know, a few years, really. So it's certainly not going back to the 80s and where did all this originate with this kind of split, really.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things. I mean, from a sociological point of view, I've always said that if you're looking at the new internet influencers and stuff, they generally talk within the welfare paradigm. I don't think it's their fault.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they've actually come into a movement in which animal welfare dominates, and they've seen the claims making, and then they've come up with their own version of it. But it's still within the animal welfare paradigm. So the overwhelming language they use is about abuses and cruelty, even the M word, which I detest, as you know, mercy. Mm-hmm. Mercy for animals. I hate that idea. I mean, if you're trying to create an argument to gain respect for someone's rights, and somebody else comes up, you know, have mercy. I mean, the power relations there is just off the scale, because you're presenting the human as being totally in power, and the other animals are totally dependent on you being merciful. Whereas we want to say, fuck that, respect their rights. It's a much stronger claim, isn't it? Respect their rights. They're rights bearers, respect their rights. Don't violate their rights. That is the rhetoric of the animal rights movement. And we've got a movement that says, don't be cruel, have mercy, which is all within the welfare paradigm.
Yeah, no other movement would ask for mercy. You know, you would ask for equality or rights.
It's a funny thing, isn't it? So I don't know whether we've achieved anything, but I just thought it was quite interesting, the fact that we've now got this battle for the heart and the meaning of animal welfarism, which didn't exist 30 years ago, because everybody kind of had a pretty good understanding that the one thing wasn't the other, you know. And then things have slid, presumably. Well, Francione started noticing it in the mid-90s. Hence the book, which came out in 96. And it was really happening in 2000 when his next book came out. And that's where you know, that's when veganism as a moral baseline came out as well. This idea that, you know, instead of all these single issues based on welfarism, we've got this overarching vegan idea. But I think for me and you, Benny, veganism, if anything, philosophical, it'd have to be aligned with rights and not welfare.
Yeah, I think you can only arrive at veganism through rights. If you're thinking of veganism as that position, it's a principle against the commodification and use of animals. So I don't see how you can really arrive at it through utilitarianism, because there's still going to be those exceptions where they're thinking it's okay to use animals at certain times, and maybe even justifying it as well.
What do you make of this point? Try saying, for example, in a vegan group that it's not about loving animals. Now, the chances are I have done, and I suspect you might have done as well, Beirne.
Not so much.
Oh, okay. On the grounds that you know what the reaction would be?
Yeah, I don't go in the groups that much now. I mean, I've got my own Twitter, my own Facebook, and my own Instagram, and
I mean, you must see memes saying,
yeah,
you know, if you're not an animal lover, you can't be a vegan. What is it? You know, if you are an animal lover, you must be a vegan. You must see.
you can't eat meat and love animals. That type of thing is what you see. Yeah, yeah.
But you never, because I always try to do it diplomatically.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the same as when people still using the "it" word. I try and put things out. Request, please don't call other animals "it." You know, and some people react very violently to even that.
Yeah, you see bad reactions to that. Yeah.
Yeah. But I often say, well, really, I prefer to say that we're there to bring about the respect for other animals rather than this idea of loving them. So that never made sense to a big lot of my generation, anyway. You know, in fact, there was a famous speech given in the late 80s where somebody made the point. I can't repeat it because it's got kind of racial overtones now, but basically saying, "Don't call me an animal lover." You know, I'm not. I'm an animal respecter. You know, and they were making a connection with the civil rights movement and what the white allies were being called by the, you know, the people who were opposed to civil rights. So you probably get the gist of what I mean. Okay, well we've been going for an hour and almost 20, so maybe this is a good time. Do you want to make any last points or anything, Beirne?
Yeah, I think that's been really interesting, especially about how some of the old.
Before you do it, I'll do it. This is Benny's book, so buy it, folks. Let's save you the bother of doing that now, Beirne. So.
I'm bad at self-promotion.
You've normally got a picture of it behind you, haven't you? Where's that gone?
Oh, it's over on the other wall. Yeah.
Well, you're being modest nowadays. So, yeah, sorry, I cut you off halfway through.
That's okay. So it's just the organisations used to have that understanding of welfare and rights, and maybe that's been lost a bit even amongst vegans and, you know, people who are what we would call animal welfare, but maybe they don't realise it. But I think it's because just the way the movement's gone, that's kind of the water everyone is swimming in. So they don't, you know, they're not that conscious of it really. I think what you have to do is look back in history and understand the movement and go right, you know, back. There's some good websites. I think it's Candid Hominid does a really good history.
Yeah,
veganism, you know, and obviously look at your own site there as well, Roger. People go or on Force a Vegan, look at those history articles, and then just understand how, you know, if you're going to join a movement, have a bit of respect for the movement and how it's evolved as well. But in terms of the opposition as well,
I feel that very strongly. One of the first things I did when I joined the movement, and Jake Conroy said this from the direct action side of it, is you start to read about the history of the movement you've just joined. Yeah. In order to kind of get some kind of handle on it. And I've always said that there's nothing wrong with the idea that movements, their ideas, and even core ideas, they can change and, you know, in a sense of evolving. But that evolution requires people to understand what was in order to critique it. Yeah. Whereas now you've got people coming in and just stating what it is without any reference to what the, you know, other people thought it was or what people understood it to be. Yeah. And so that's the thing that kind of confuses me because, well, I think on one hand it's very arrogant. I mean, I would never dream of going to a movement and just going, you know, I always make the analogy with, say, somebody joined the Marxist movement, if there is such a thing, and just walked in and said, "Fuck this Marx guy. What does he? I'll tell you what Marxism means." People will go, "Hang on a second, you know, you've at least got to, if you're going to critique Marx, you're going to have to understand what you're talking about." Doesn't
Yeah.
again? It's not what happens in this movement. It's quite scary to me because it's arrogant, and I was a bit flabbergasted when I thought when all these new people came in, they'd be interested in the movement, and most of them don't seem to be. In fact, they seem to be, if anything, resistant to it. And I've never quite understood that, really. So
The first thing I did really, I suppose, when I joined the movement by becoming vegan is, looked at the history of it. I wanted to know what it meant. And then because I was involved in these kind of debate groups, people would be coming up with questions. So we kind of helped each other in this debate group. You know, if someone had a question, we would all try and come up with the answer together. So I think that really, it was the vegans versus non-vegans debates group on Facebook. So all the admins, we just used to help each other, and we were kind of unified.
sounds like a good book, Danny. What do you think? Do you reckon it's a good book?
Oh,
You-
yeah.
Actually, you're talking about doing a modified version or a slimmed down
Yeah,
version?
so I've got
A to Z?
a book signing I'm going to do in Port Sunlight on the Sunday the 24th at the Live a Better Life vegan fair there. So people can come and argue with me there if they want. Or I'll just sign the book for them, and that might do them.
You don't mind them arguing once they've paid? You've been
Yeah,
like the
buy a
Mike
book,
Tyson
yeah.
thing about, is this the right room for an argument? I don't know if you've ever seen that sketch, but
I might set
Right,
up a type banner and yeah.
on the basis of the movement's history, I just want to finish with this, which is that Tyler Starr and Jake Conroy have started a new podcast series. Goes under the name Radicals and Revolutionaries, and it's in a website called radicalsandrevolutionaries.com. They've got 6 episodes out. One's a primer, and then there's 2 interviews with Dave Wetton, who was an early hunt saboteur in Britain, and he started being an animal advocate from 1961. And then there's 2 with Ronnie Lee, and then there's one with me. And then I think next Tuesday, is that tomorrow? No, next Tuesday. I forgot what day it was. In 2 days' time, folks. Me, I'm completely on top of what day it is. There is a new one out, and I think that's someone from the Liberation Leagues, which is really interesting development. What happened in Britain? That there was the Animal Liberation Front, which was the small groups of direct action people, and then there was the Animal Liberation Leagues, which were the large groups of direct action people, and they had a different philosophy. And so that's really interesting. So I'm looking forward to that one next Tuesday. So Radicals and Revolutionaries is a good one, and you've probably got time to read Benny's book before you tune in to the next one of those. So yeah. So thanks a lot, Benny, for being my what is it? Kind of a experimental rabbit
Sounding board.
Yeah, sounding board. Yeah. I've lost all my words today. Okay, folks, thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you some other time. Don't know when, but we will.
Go vegan.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, go vegan, you people. Stop forcing me to be vegan.